wanted to ask you a little bit about your own personal healing work, to whatever extent you want to discuss it, in terms of, after you escaped from the situation, that you're in throughout your childhood. I think a lot of people are quite amazed to see such a clear and present, person. As you've said yourself, you should really be in a mental institution. I mean, anyone who went through that for a weekend, would be, screwed up for life. And yet, the bulk of your childhood was in this horrible situation. So once you escaped when you were 19, I know you've described how. Now, was that Blake that you escaped to, and
Yes.
that you described in the house, and you're cutting yourself, and
Yes.
over the next 5, 6, 7 years, how did you come back to your senses?
I threw myself into sports.
That's right. You're an extreme skier.
Yeah. And I feel like what sports did is I was trying to use sports to escape all of the stuff that I've been going through, because it's very simple. I mean, if you look at the mind of someone who's escaped from a situation like I escaped from, where everything's controlled, you're told what to eat, you're told how to move, you basically have somebody who's walking you through life, ordering you about what to do every minute of every day. It's about self-abuse, obviously. You're skating all the time or skiing all the time, and your physical body goes in and out of these patterns of ill health, because when you're at that level of athletics, it's not a matter of if your body will break down, it's when. It's very parallel. So it was just familiar enough that I had a coach telling me what to do all day long. I was punishing my body, and I could do that to the extent where I could push it past the limits of where normal human bodies go. So I was winning. It was very structured. I wake up, I know what I'm doing at 8 o'clock, I know what I'm doing at 9, 10, 11, 12, but what I didn't really account for is the fact that you find quickly in the sports world that the only thing that's preventing you from getting to that next level, whether that's a World Cup title or the Olympics, is always your own mind. It's not your body. We may use excuses like, well, I didn't make it to the Olympics because my body weight's too small or too little, and I am in a gravity sport. Is that what keeps you in that spot is mentality. And if in order to really conquer that kind of mentality, you have to go back into what it is that's blocking you.
Yeah.
Of course, that led me back into my childhood. And so I had an incentive that I didn't have before. Because when you get away, it's kind of like I never want to look back,
Yeah, I just did a video that I just uploaded this morning, and I was talking about one of your posts on your Facebook page. You said, as long as you have resistance to revisiting the past and to traumatic events or whatever coming up, then it's unresolved, it's unhealed, and true healing means you can go there with your mind and be okay with it and have no resistance to it. But also, what I said in the video was, sometimes when you get out of a situation like this, you come back from a war, you get out of an abusive relationship, just for the sake of your survival, you just have to get the hell out of there and just be like, screw all this, I'm never looking back. And so, yeah, I mean, you just have to go into survival mode and do what you need to do to survive, and then look back to it. So were there any particular, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, after that running away, the sports gave me an incentive to actually go deal with my crap, basically. And I ended up lining up with someone who is a terrible relationship. It was an absolutely terrible relationship, but it was interesting because we actually saved each other. That year when I was on the U.S. telemark ski team, and I had run into somebody who was on the U.S. speed skating team, and he was addicted to cocaine.
Okay.
And I ended up taking him into my house and ended up helping him detox from cocaine and get off of drugs. And it was interesting because even though the relationship was terrible, we saved each other's life. So that's what I did for him. And what he did for me is he actually was the first person who looked at me and said, "This is not okay. What you're talking to me about in your childhood is A, not normal, B, I am literally going to leave you if you don't get help because it's too hard to be in a relationship with you. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I hated him for it at the time, but he was the one that actually pushed me into therapy. And luckily, for the first time in 13 therapists that I had had at that point, I met one that was amazing.
Okay.
And she dealt strictly with ritual abuse.
Uh-huh.
That's the whole practice. Can you believe that?
Wow, that's lucky that you found her.
It's really depressing that in Utah it can be its own profession just to see kids that have been ritually tortured.
Yeah.
But I went in and she knew exactly what she was dealing with, and she was incredibly good.
Uh-huh.
And she pushed me to places that I would not have gone by myself at all.
I see.
And I've spent 5 years going in, mentally saving all of these children one by one, and every single scene that was stuck in me, and then rescuing them and finding some kind of internal resolution. And then it was all about mental awareness, awareness of why you're doing the things you're doing.
Yeah.
Why is it that you have to line up 5 men at a time just in case one of them decides that they can't hang out with you today,
Yeah. Subconscious fears.
After years of that, I was confused. I mean, I had a lot more freedom. I was to the point where I had a lot of awareness. That's what separates me from a lot of people, I think. I was able to get out of survival mode. I like to think that's because, in general, I'm kind of a ball buster and a little bit brave. So, I'm the kind of person that if I'm really fearful of something, I don't really like putting up with that in myself.
Yeah.
So that pushed me into this awareness where suddenly I started asking the question, okay, well, I understand I'm free enough that I can see the whole picture. I can admit to the truth of my childhood, which is that, this guy wasn't actually your real dad, and he probably didn't do this because he loved you. He probably just wanted to hurt you and get off on it.
Mm-hmm.
So after that, it was still this question, okay, but I'm not happy. Like, I'm still waking up with major issues, and I have no idea what that word means. And it was interesting because what I was met with in the mental health community is nobody knows what that is.
Mm-hmm.
And that didn't work for me.
Now, what didn't work again?
That they don't know what happiness is. They didn't know what that would take. And the general consensus, even amongst the major psychologists, who are in charge of trauma, invented how girls like me get themselves mentally out of situations like that without killing themselves or someone else.
Yeah.
They still had this attitude of, where they sit down, even with anybody that I was with, and say, look, she can't be left by herself in a house, ever. She can't ever drive herself somewhere by herself, ever.
Mm-hmm.
We're dealing with certain limits. I mean, they bring out the brain charts and say, look, this is what Teal's brain looks like. It's formed this way because at this early age, she was abused. And the brain does this when it's abused. And so it's actually malformed and isn't going to work the way you want it to work. And I would sit there and listen to them. And for a while, I sunk down into the stupor of like, all right, this is my life. It's just the bummer. I have to basically warn everyone before they get into relationships with me that this is what they're dealing with.
What a terrible message.
Yeah, and like after probably a year of that, I was like, this doesn't work. I am not going to deal with that.
Yeah, you're not going to accept that happiness is no longer possible. It's just a brain thing, and that's it. Deal with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, good for you
And so I started researching a lot. I started looking into all kinds of different people's ideas, self-help experts about what happiness was, and I would read it and be like, oh, that's crap. And I'd read it and be like, that's crap too. And read it and be like, oh, that's horrible. What the hell are these people talking about? And then I stopped for a minute and I was like, wait a minute, Teal. Why is it that you know that this stuff is crap that people are talking about, that it doesn't work, that it's not a good explanation? And how can you say that on one hand, and on the other hand say that you don't know what happiness is or how to teach it?
Yeah.
And I sat there for a minute and thought, oh my gosh. You're right. Maybe I experience more happiness than the average person does, and I just don't know it yet.
Mm-hmm.
It's true. It's completely true. And I was watching people. I spent a long time observing people in their day-to-day jobs, just sort of surviving. And I was like, holy crap. This whole time I've been like, what the hell is happiness? No, I actually do know what happiness is. And most people on this earth aren't living it. And I know how to get them to that place. And then I started teaching.
Awesome. You were really, questioning everything, it sounds like, gathering every, bit of information you could. Really fascinating to hear your healing journey there. That certainly, put things into perspective a lot, and yeah, I assume there must have been a big chunk of time there, where you were, you know, you didn't just come out of this and be like, okay, now I'm going to YouTube and.
Oh no, no, and it's like right now I try to be in a good place about how nuts I was.
Mm-hmm.
But I still sink into those patterns sometimes where I'm like, oh my gosh, that person had to deal with that with me. That's pretty sad.
Uh-huh.
I was not much fun when I got away at all.
Uh-huh. Oh, well, I'm sure.